Hello and welcome to Reigate Maths. My name's Simon, and in this video we're going to be looking at finding roots of quadratic equations. We're going to look at the three methods for doing that and how we can use those to find the roots. So hopefully, as you are aware from GCSE, there are three methods for finding the roots of a quadratic equation. You might also hear these referred to as solutions. And for those of you who are interested in kind of further mathsy type stuff, this video is just focusing on real roots. Okay, we're not dealing with things with non-real roots, so that is for a different video. So our main three methods are factorising, completing the square, and using the quadratic formula. If you're unfamiliar with completing the square, please go back and watch the previous video on completing the square. That should help, but hopefully these are all you remember from GCSE. Now, a really important thing with finding roots of quadratic equations is this. These methods only work, well, apart from completing the square, but it's easier if we just think about all methods. These methods only work if our equation is equal to 0. So if you don't have your quadratic, so this is our quadratic, equal to 0, the first thing you must do is rearrange to make it equal to 0. Okay, if you don't have that, these methods do not work. So, looking first at factorising. So if we are factorising a quadratic equation, it means putting it into two brackets, which typically will end up looking like this. Now you might have some numbers on the front of the x's, and we'll deal with an example that does that in a bit, but broadly it's here. Now, why does this work? Well, we know that either this bracket or this bracket, or both of those brackets, are going to be equal to some number. If we have two numbers times together that equal 0, that means that either one of the numbers or the other, or both, must be equal 0, because the only way to times two things together and get 0 as your answer if one of them is, or both of them are 0. That allows us to rearrange to get our roots. So we've got three examples here. We can see they're all equal to 0, so we don't need to worry about rearranging first, but we need to factorise them. Now, in the exam, it's very unlikely you're going to be told a method. If you are, it will probably be in a part A, part B situation, where part A will be show that this equation can be written in this form, then part B would be hence find the roots or solve the equation, something like that. But that's very unlikely, and it's usually not to do with factorising. So when we are factorising, we're putting it into two brackets. Now, we have x's here. We know they're going to be just x because our a value is 1. We know they're going to be plus because everything here is plus, so we don't need to worry about kind of really anything else. And then we need two numbers that times together to get 18 and add together to get plus 11. Now you can do this by trial and error, or you can kind of spot it. 9 times 2 is 18. 9 plus 2 is 11. So we get x plus 9, x plus 2. Now we are solving this equation. This equation is equal 0. So when you are factorising and writing out your working, we have an equal 0 here. Do not lose this. Okay, it is incredibly important. If you don't have this equal 0, it's technically not correct. And we are seeing more and more the exam boards are getting very picky with correct notation and correct use of maths. So if you are solving an equation, make sure you got equals something, probably 0, all the way through. From here, we've got x plus 9 equals 0, x plus 2 equals 0, so x is minus 9, or x equals minus 2. Okay, it's or, not and, because x can't be minus 9 and minus 2 at the same time. It is or. Now what does this mean? This means our graph crosses the x-axis at minus 9 and minus 2. We can use the other information that we've looked at in the completing the square video to also find out more information about a graph should we want to draw a graph. So we've got 2 more examples there. I'd like you to pause the video, have a go at them yourself, and then unpause, and we can go through them. So with these other 2 examples, they do have something specific to do with them that we didn't cover in the first example. This one had a minus. So we needed 2 numbers that multiply together to get minus 5, and then add together to get plus 4. Now having prime numbers as either this or this, so your A or your C, is really handy because it makes it much easier to spot what these numbers in our brackets are going to be. Okay, so we've got minus 5, so our only options are 5 and minus 1, or minus 5 and 1. And it should be very quick to see which 2 add together to get positive 4, leading to our roots of minus 5, 1. This third one, we don't have a constant term, which means one of our brackets is just x. Now you could write this as x plus 0 as a bracket, but you just don't need to, so I wouldn't. You can see here I've left my answer as a fraction. Some students, a lot of students, will, at the start of the A-level, prefer to write this as minus 3.5. That's fine, but broadly, throughout the A-level, using fractions and exact values rather than decimals is going to be a lot more useful later on. So while the maths is relatively straightforward, try and get into the habit of using fractions rather than decimals. If you write it as minus 3.5, that's absolutely fine. It is still correct, but using fractions is often much more useful long term. Now, some of you might have a method that you use from GCSE in terms of kind of separating the, in this case, like the plus 11x into 2 parts, the plus 18 into multiple parts, so you can kind of easily see one or both of the brackets. Although that is a useful method if you find this really, really hard, it's a method to really try and get out of the habit of doing, because quadratics form a huge part of the A-level. They're really, really useful in a lot of different topics, and ultimately you need to be able to do things like factorising really quickly. If you're spending a long time doing a thorough method, great, but that's time that you might end up needing come to the exam. So although it's a useful method and it's a good method, and like I've said in other videos, if you have a method that takes a long time, it's better to do that and get it right than rush and get it wrong. But as you practice this more and more, try and get out of the habit of using a specific method and do it more by looking like I've done in this video. Next, we're going to look at using the quadratic formula. Now, the quadratic formula you do need to learn. So let's just have it at the top. So we've got it for these examples. So if we have ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, remember it's got to be equal to 0, then x is minus b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. If you're interested in where this comes from, it comes from completing the square. If you complete the square following the full method from this ax squared plus bx plus c, you will end up with this as your solutions. A lot of the time, if you're using the quadratic formula, you're going to also need to be giving your answer exact, which will probably be having surds in. So you just need to be careful when you are using these equations. Now, hopefully, you'll be able to just put things into your equation, no problem, or the formula, no problem, and use it. But if you need to, underneath your quadratic equation, write down what your A, B, and C are. Again, this is a really useful way to make sure you don't put things in the wrong place. Particularly with examples like this where we have negative values, you do need to be really, really careful. So, using the formula, I would always advise showing use of the formula. Okay, particularly with this question where it says use the formula, you've been told to do it. So we get minus b, so b was minus 5, plus or minus the square root of. Now, when I'm writing this out, you'll notice I don't put the square root there. It's because I don't like having to squash things under a square root. So I write the b squared minus 4ac in first, and then just put the square root around it. If you don't like that, don't do it. Put the square root in first. That's entirely up to you. Okay, so we get b squared. So be careful with this. B is a negative number, so you need it in brackets squared. Minus 4 times a times c, all under a square root. And that's all over 2 times 2. And then we simplify. So 5 minus minus 5 plus or minus the square root of 25 minus 8 all over 4. So 5 plus or minus root 17 over 4. You don't need to write it as two separate expressions unless you're told to. If you're told to give this in a specific form, then do that. But otherwise, this is sufficient for the answer. What you shouldn't do is you shouldn't give this as a decimal. Although the question doesn't say use the formula to give the exact roots of, when we're in A level, the implication is you should be giving exact unless you're told otherwise. So don't just whack this in your calculator, work it out, and write down a decimal. You want to leave it like this. So pause the video, have a go at part B, and we'll come back to that once you're done. So with this part B, putting our values in, we can see we get rational roots, and that's fine. Just because we're using the quadratic formula doesn't mean it's going to be a surd as our answer. It might not. We could have done this one by factorising. But sometimes using the quadratic formula is going to be quicker if you find factorising really, really hard. In this case, you are expected to simplify as far as you can. Now, depending on the way the question is asked, you can skip some of these steps. For instance, this second step here, you could probably skip that and jump straight from here to here. That would likely be fine. Likewise, you could probably skip from here to here. Now, if you're using a calculator, your calculator will probably just do that for you. But just be aware, you might be able to skip some steps, but don't skip too many. And that's using the quadratic formula. The final method for solving a quadratic equation is using completing the square. And likely those of you who are doing further maths, this will be the one you become most familiar with, because it's really, really useful when you start getting non-real roots. So the first things first is we need to put our quadratic equation, x squared minus 4x minus 7 equals 0, into completed square form. X minus 2 squared minus 4 minus 7 equals 0. X minus 2 squared minus 11 equals 0. What we're then going to do is we're going to rearrange this equation. So we're going to first isolate our bracket, and then we're going to square root both sides. And this is where students often make mistakes. Something you have to be very careful to remember is when you're square rooting, you get plus or minus. That's where the plus or minus in the quadratic formula comes from. It's from this. We then continue to rearrange until we get x on its own, and we're done. I really like this method. I think it's very quick. I would more often than not use this instead of the quadratic formula, but if you can factorize, really you always should. Now the other thing you need to be able to do in this new A-level is use your calculator. And these calculators that they've designed for the past few years have functions for you to solve quadratic equations on them. Now I'm going to be demonstrating this using the FX901CW ClassWiz, which is the most recently released Casio. If you have an older Casio or a slightly different one, or you're using a graphics calculator, you can do the same thing, but the order of buttons and things might be slightly different. Okay, so first things first, you need to go to wherever your menu is, and then find the equations option. So here we've got equation, and we select that. Now we want to go to polynomial, because we are dealing with what is known as a polynomial function. And in this case, it gives us a nice quadratic here. Different calculators will give you different options. If it's asking for an order or degree, the order is 2. We then input our quadratic equation. So we're going to be using the example we've just gone through there. So I'm going to have 1 minus 4 and minus 7. We type that all in, and then you just press this execute button or equals, and it should give us our 2 solutions. So you see we got 2 plus or minus root 11. Those are our 2 solutions. This also gives us a lot more information. For instance, it'll tell us the minimum value, so the x coordinate of the minimum value and the y coordinate of the minimum value. So that links back to the completing the square video. So that is quite a useful thing to be able to do to check your answers. You can use this to kind of reverse engineer a little bit, but you do need to be careful using that when you have fractional values here. But that's overall how to solve quadratic equations using the 3 different methods and checking your answer using your calculator. Thank you for watching.